A torch hissed in the wet leaves. A horn screamed across the black trees. A pale rider broke from the silver birches, with fangs already bared. The girl carrying the torch did not run. She turned and faced him. She opened her cracked lips. One syllable left her throat. It was older than the forest. It was older than the moon over the forest. It was older than the language the rider had used to curse her. The rider's horse reared. The rider's knees buckled. The rider fell into the leaves and could not stand. Then the second rider fell. Then the third. Then the king himself slid from his black stallion and sank into the wet earth at her feet. Her name was Lyra. She was a kitchen servant. She had never been taught to fight. So how did one whisper bring an entire vampire hunt to its knees? Stay with me on this one. Lyra had swept ash from the obsidian fireplaces of Valric's fortress since she was old enough to lift a broom. She was 19 now. She was thin. She was quiet. She had small hands that were always cold. The other servants called her Mouse because she never spoke unless she was spoken to, and she was almost never spoken to. The vampires did not see her. To them she was a shape that carried goblets. She was a shape that carried wood. She was a shape that emptied basins of dark water no human should ever have to look at too closely. She liked it that way. Invisible was safe. Invisible meant nobody noticed when you took an extra crust of bread. Invisible meant nobody noticed when you slept too long. Invisible meant nobody chose you for the hunt. The fortress sat on a mountain of black stone. The mountain looked down on a forest of silver birches that grew straight and tall like bones standing up from the earth. The forest had a name in the human tongue that nobody used anymore. The vampires had their own name for it. They called it the larder. Lyra had grown up hearing the horns of the Crimson Hunt. Once every season the king rode out with his court of ancient predators. They chased mortal prey through the birches under the full moon. The prey were always prisoners or debtors or peasants who had said the wrong thing in the wrong tavern. The prey were always carried back as cold bodies in the morning. The cooks were always told to bury the bones quickly and to never ask questions. Lyra never asked questions. She buried what they told her to bury. She washed what they told her to wash. She kept her eyes on the floor. Her grandmother had been different. Her grandmother had eyes that were not afraid. Her grandmother had hands that were not cold. Her grandmother had taught her things in the dark hours before dawn when the fortress slept and the ovens were cold. The old woman would sit on the edge of the straw pallet and whisper words that nobody else in the world remembered. Words that were not in any human language Lyra had ever heard. Words that sounded like wind moving over old stones. "Say it back, child," her grandmother would whisper. "Say it back exactly. Do not change one breath." Lyra had said the words back. Every night. For years. She had not understood them. She had only known that her grandmother's eyes shone when she said them, and that her grandmother's hands gripped her shoulders too tight when she got them right. "This is the old tongue," her grandmother had said once. 900 years ago the moon and the great dark one swore a pact in this language. The pact bound them. The pact still binds them. The words are nearly all dead. I am the last who knows them. When I am gone, you will be the last. Why me? Lyra had asked. Because you are a quiet child. Because nobody will ever suspect a quiet girl. Then the old woman had died. Quietly. In her sleep. 2 winters ago. Lyra had buried her under the apple tree behind the kitchens and had told nobody about the words. The words stayed in her head. They lived behind her teeth. They were the only thing in the world that was truly hers. On the night of the Crimson Hunt, the head cook came to her in the scullery. He was sweating even though the air was cold. He would not meet her eyes. "The captain wants a torch-bearer," he said. "He picked you." She set the wet rag down on the table. Her stomach went cold and small. "The torch-bearers come back," she said. It was not a question. It was a prayer. The head cook still did not look at her. "Sometimes," he said. She understood then. She understood why he was sweating. She understood why he had picked her, and not one of the strong scullery boys. She was the smallest. She was the slowest. She was the one nobody would miss when the king decided the torch-bearer should also be the first quarry. She did not cry. She did not beg. She had learned a long time ago that crying changed nothing in the obsidian fortress. She wiped her hands on her apron. She walked to the courtyard. She picked up the torch they handed her. The king was already mounted. Vaelric, the Black King. He sat on a horse the color of a starless sky. His hair was long and dark, and his face was the carved face of a young man who had been a young man for 900 years. His eyes found her in the courtyard. They were the color of old wine in a cup nobody had drunk from in a very long time. He looked at her the way a wolf looks at a hare. Not cruel. Not kind. Just hungry. Just patient. She lowered her eyes. She did not see the small smile he gave her then. The horn screamed. The gates of the obsidian fortress opened. 40 mounted predators rode out into the silver forest under the full red moon. And Lyra walked behind them with a torch in her cold hand, knowing that very soon the horn would scream a second time, and that second scream would be for her. She walked into the larder. The forest closed around her like a mouth. The silver birches were taller than she had thought they would be from the fortress windows. Their bark peeled in long pale strips. Her boots made small sucking sounds. The torch in her hand smoked more than it burned because the wood the cooks had given her was green. They had given her green wood on purpose. Green wood would not last the night. She was supposed to walk in the center of the column. She was supposed to light the way for the riders. Vaelric rode at the front. His elders rode behind him. The younger vampires, the ones with the wild eyes and the new fangs, rode at the back. They kept looking at her. They kept licking their lips. One of them, a thin, pale boy who could not have been turned more than a year ago, leaned down from his saddle as he passed her and whispered, "Run when the horn sounds, mouse. It tastes better when you run." She did not answer him. She kept walking. She kept her eyes on the wet leaves. The hunt rode for an hour. They did not speak much. Vampires on the hunt did not speak. They listened. They breathed in the smell of the forest. Their horses moved without sound. Only Lyra's boots made noise. Only her breath made fog in the cold air. Only her heart, she knew, was loud enough for every immortal in the column to hear it knocking against her thin ribs. They came to a clearing. Vaelric raised one gloved hand. The column halted. He turned his horse and looked back along the line of riders until his old wine eyes found her again. "Mouse," he said. His voice was low and quiet. It carried across the clearing the way smoke carries across still water. "Drop the torch." She did not understand at first. The torch was the only light. The torch was the only reason she was here. She looked up at him and her hand trembled. "Drop it," he said again. And this time the patience in his voice was thinner. She dropped the torch. It hissed in the wet leaves and went out. The clearing fell into red moonlight. Vaelric smiled. His fangs caught the moon. "Now run," he said. "Run as far as you can. Make it interesting." She did not move. Her legs would not move. Her breath had stopped somewhere in her throat. One of the elders laughed. A soft, cold laugh. The thin, pale boy at the back of the column made a sound like a hungry dog. Valric tilted his head. He was waiting. They were all waiting. She understood, with a clarity that felt almost like peace, that if she did not run, they would simply tear her apart where she stood, and the hunt would be over before it began. She ran. She ran the way a hare runs. Not in a straight line. She cut between the birches. She slipped on wet leaves. She fell once. She got up. She ran. Branches whipped her face. Something cut her cheek. She did not feel it. She heard the horn scream behind her. The second scream. The one for her. She heard the hooves start. 40 horses moving at once through the wet forest. The sound was not loud. It was worse than loud. It was the sound of something patient and very large moving in her direction without any hurry at all, because it knew it could not be outrun. She ran until her chest burned. She ran until her legs went weak. She came to a place where the birches grew thicker and the moonlight broke through in pale shafts. She stopped. She bent over. She could not get air. Her cracked lips opened and closed, and no breath would come. A hoof cracked a branch behind her. She turned. She saw him. Valric. Alone. He had outridden his elders. His black horse stood at the edge of the moonlight. He had dismounted. He was walking toward her on foot through the wet leaves. He had taken his gloves off. His hands were pale and long, and the fingernails were a little too sharp. He was smiling. He was not in any kind of hurry. Behind him, the other riders were coming. She could hear them now. The thin, pale boy was laughing. She thought of her grandmother. She thought of the old woman's eyes shining in the dark. She thought of the words behind her teeth. She did not know if they would work. She did not know what they were for. She only knew that she was about to die, and that the only thing in the world that was truly hers was a string of dead syllables, and there would never again be a moment to spend them. So she spent them. She straightened her back. She faced the king who was coming to kill her. She looked into his old wine eyes, and she whispered the true name of Valric in the old tongue. The sound that left her throat was not a sound her throat had ever made before. It was not loud. It was the opposite of loud. It was a single soft breath shaped like a name that had not been spoken aloud since the moon, and the great dark ones swore their pact 9 centuries ago in this same forest under this same red moon. Valric stopped walking. His smile fell off his face. He went down on one knee in the wet leaves. He could not stand back up. Behind him in the trees, every rider in the column did the same. The elders, the young ones, the thin, pale boy who had wanted her to run. 40 immortal predators on their knees in the leaves of their own forest, their heads bowed, their fangs hidden, their eyes wide and terrified and fixed on the small, thin girl who had just unmade them with a single breath. The forest went quiet. Even the wind stopped. Lyra stood in the red moonlight with the dead language still warm on her tongue, and for the first time in her life, she did not lower her eyes. Then somewhere in the deep trees an owl called. The owl called once. Soft. Valric raised his head. Slowly, like a man waking from a long fever. Lyra, he said. He had never spoken her name before. He had never known her name before. The fact that he knew it now told her everything. He had felt the old tongue go through him, the way a sword goes through a body. He had heard her grandmother's voice in her breath. He had understood, in that one whispered syllable, every secret she had carried since she was a child. Lyra, he said again, listen to me very carefully. We have less than an hour. She did not answer. She could not. Her hands were shaking now that the moment was over. The cold of the night was finding her at last. She was a thin girl in a thin dress in a wet forest full of monsters on their knees, and the only thing keeping her standing was that she had not yet figured out how to fall. "They will come for you," Valric said. His voice was different now. The hunger was gone from it. Something old and tired was in its place. "Not me. Not these. Others. My rivals on the council. They have wanted what you are for 900 years. They have spies in my own kitchens. The moment word reaches them that the old tongue spoke tonight in my forest, they will send killers. Quiet killers. Fast killers. They will be on horses, within minutes of the news leaving these trees." She found her voice. "Barely. Why? Because you are the last scribe of the pact, Lyra. You are the last living throat that can speak the names. While you live, the great dark ones who were buried under the mountains 9 centuries ago stay buried. The chains that hold them are made of the words your grandmother taught you. If you die, every chain breaks. Every old monster wakes. My rivals want them awake. They have wanted them awake for a very long time." She stared at him. The kneeling king in the wet leaves. The pale hand he was slowly, carefully, holding out to her like a man offering bread to a wild animal. "You hunted me," she said. "I did," he said. "I did not know what you were. I am sorry. I am asking you now to let me put you on my horse and ride you out of this forest before they come." She thought about it. She had the power, she understood now, to leave him in the leaves. She could whisper one more syllable, and he would never stand again. She could walk out of the larder a free girl. The king who had wanted to hunt her down for sport would die in the same wet earth where her grandmother had once knelt to whisper words to a child who could not yet say them right. "If you're still with me, hit that subscribe button." She looked down at Valric. She looked at the throat she could unmake. And then she looked past him, at the other riders still bowed in the trees, at the thin, pale boy with his face pressed into the wet leaves, and she understood something her grandmother had tried to tell her once, and that she had been too young to hear. A name is not a weapon. A name is a key. And a key only matters when you choose what to open and what to keep closed. "Get up," she said to Valric. He could not. The name still held him. She closed her eyes. She reached behind her teeth for a second syllable. Not his true name. Something smaller. A word her grandmother had called the unbinding. A breath that loosened what the name had bound. She had practiced it for years on stones and birds, and once on a stray cat in the kitchen. She had never used it on a vampire. She did not know if it would work on a king. She whispered it. Valric drew one long breath. Then he stood up. "Your horse," she said. "Now." He nodded once. He walked back through the leaves to the black stallion. He swung up into the saddle. He turned the horse and held out his pale hand to her again. She took it. He pulled her up behind him as easily as a man lifting a candle. The horse spun under them. The other riders were beginning to stir in the trees, slowly, like men coming out of a deep sleep. They watched the king and the kitchen servant ride past them, and none of them moved to stop it. The thin, pale boy looked up as they passed him. There was no hunger in his face anymore. Only fear. He lowered his head again into the wet leaves. Valric rode hard. The black horse moved like a piece of the night that had been let loose. The silver birches blurred. Lyra held the king's cloak in her two small hands and pressed her forehead between his shoulder blades, because the wind on her face had become unbearable. She could feel the cold, dead muscle of his back through the cloak. He did not breathe the way men breathed. He did not need to. "Where?" she said into the wind. "There is a chapel," he said over his shoulder. 3 leagues east. Stone walls. Old wards. The wards were carved by your grandmother's grandmother. They will not let an assassin cross the threshold uninvited. We will reach it in 20 minutes if the horse holds. And then I will explain to you what your life is going to be from this hour forward. And you will decide whether I deserve to keep my name." She did not answer. She held on. The forest screamed past them. Somewhere far behind them she heard, faintly, a second pack of riders entering the trees from a different direction. Lighter horses. Faster horses. The horses her grandmother had once described in a whisper when Lyra was still small enough to fit on her lap. The horses of the council assassins. Valeric heard them too. He bent lower over the stallion's neck and drove the horse faster. The wet leaves became a black smear under the hooves. "How did they know already?" Lyra said. "They have always known," he said. "They have been waiting 900 years for any throat at all to speak the name. The moment you spoke it, every ward in every old tower flared. They felt it in their wine cups. They felt it in their dreams. They are writing now. Will we make it?" He did not answer for a long moment. Then he said, "If you trust me." She thought about that. The man who had ordered her to drop the torch. The man who had told her to run so the kill would taste better. The man who was now riding her out of his own forest with the strength of a black horse under them and 1,000 years of enemies behind them. Trust is a long word, my lord. Then start with something shorter. Hold on. She held on. They came out of the silver birches at a place where the land broke down into a long, gentle slope. The chapel stood at the bottom of the slope. It was small. It was made of gray stone, the color of old bone. Ivy had grown over its walls. A single low door stood open. No light came from inside. Valeric pulled the horse up short. He swung down from the saddle and lifted Lyra after him with the same easy strength as before. He set her on her feet. He kept one hand on her arm. The hand was cold and it was steady. "Inside," he said. Quickly. She walked through the low door. The wards her grandmother's grandmother had carved into the stone over the lintel glowed once as she passed under them. They tasted her. They knew her. They let her in. Valeric followed and the wards glowed again. They tasted him. They knew him too. They let him in, but only barely. The stones above his head hummed for a long moment like a warning bell that had been struck and was still deciding whether to stop. Inside the chapel, there was an altar of plain gray stone. There were no candles. There was no fire. The only light was the red moon coming through one small high window. "Sit," Valeric said. He gestured at the steps of the altar. She sat. Her legs were grateful. He stood across the chapel from her. He kept the distance. He understood, she realized, what his nearness meant to a girl who had been told to run from him an hour ago. He understood, and he was being careful. The carefulness, more than anything else he had done, was the first thing about him that made her see him as something other than the Black King. "Lyra," he said, "there are 3 things you need to know before they reach this chapel. We have perhaps 20 minutes. Listen." She listened. 1. Your grandmother did not die in her sleep. She was poisoned by a member of my own court, a vampire who serves the rival council. He has been in my fortress for 70 years. He is the head cook, the one who sent you out tonight with green wood. He chose you for this hunt because he was told to. He was told to deliver you to the larder so that I would kill you without ever knowing what you were. They did not expect you to speak the name. They did not believe the old woman had passed it down. They thought the old tongue died with her. Lyra's hands went very still in her lap. The head cook. The man who would not meet her eyes. The man who had been sweating in the cold scullery. She had not known how to read that sweat then. She read it now. 2. My court will not protect you. Not from this. Half of them serve my rivals in secret. The other half are loyal to me, but they are afraid of the old tongue. They saw you bring 40 riders to their knees with one breath. They will not stand between you and an assassin. They will stand back and watch. They will tell themselves it is none of their concern. She nodded slowly. She had lived in the obsidian fortress long enough to believe this without any effort at all. 3. He paused. He looked at her across the cold chapel. The red moonlight from the high window cut his face into halves. 3. I am asking you, Lyra, to ride with me to the old tower at Veldenmoor. It is 2 nights east. The walls are older than the pact. The wards are older than the pact. If we reach it, you live. Inside those walls, I can teach you the rest of what your grandmother did not have time to teach you. The unbindings, the renewals, the shape of the pact itself. You will be safe. You will be more than safe. You will be the keeper. The one the moon listens to. The one whose breath holds the buried ones in their sleep. She looked up at him. And what do you want in return? My name, he said. Very quietly. I want to keep my name. I want to know that the throat that holds it has chosen, freely, not to spend it on me. She thought about that for a long time. Long enough that he began to look as though he might kneel again, this time of his own will, and not because of any word she had whispered. A horse screamed outside. Not their black stallion. A different horse. A lighter horse. A faster horse. Then another. Then a third. The assassins had found the chapel sooner than he had thought. Veilric drew the long dark blade from his back without seeming to move at all. He stepped between Lyra and the low door. They cannot cross the threshold, he said. But they will try. The first one tried. A pale figure in a dark cloak. He hit the wards above the lintel like a bird hitting a glass window. He fell into the wet grass outside and lay there twitching. The second one was smarter. He stayed back. He raised a small black bow. He sighted through the open door. He aimed not at Veilric. He aimed at Lyra on the altar steps. He never loosed the arrow. Veilric was across the chapel and out the door faster than the bowstring could be drawn. There was a wet sound. There was a soft thump. Veilric came back into the chapel, wiping the dark blade on the corner of his cloak. He did not look at her. He stood at the door and listened. How many, she said. 3 left, he said. They will not come close again. They are waiting for the wards to fail. They cannot fail. Not while you are inside them and breathing. How long, she said. Until dawn. The wards are sunbound. They feed on the daylight. The assassins know this. They will leave before the sun touches the stones. She looked at him across the chapel. The Black King with another vampire's blood on his cloak. The man who had hunted her. The man who had carried her out of his own forest. The man who was now standing between her and the people who had been waiting 9 centuries for her grandmother to slip. Sit down, my lord, she said. He looked at her surprised. Sit down. We have until dawn. You said you would explain what my life is going to be. Explain it. He sat down on the cold stones across from her. He set the dark blade across his knees. He began to talk. He told her about the pact. He told her about the moon. He told her about the buried ones under the mountains and the chains made of words. He told her about her grandmother as a young woman, before Lyra had been born, when the old woman had served in this same fortress and had carried the same secret behind her teeth that Lyra carried now. He told her about the rival council and their long, patient hunger to wake what should not be waked. He told her, finally, his own story. 900 years of it. The boy he had been before the pact. The king he had become after. The mistakes. The debt he had made, and the debt he had refused to make. He did not pretty it. He did not soften it. He told her about the larder and the hunts and the green wood the cooks gave the torch-bearers. He told her he had stopped, decades ago, taking any pleasure in it, and had kept doing it because it was what a king was supposed to do, and that this was the worst kind of cruelty, the kind a man keeps doing only because he has forgotten how to stop. She listened. The red moon moved across the high window. Outside the chapel, the assassins waited and did not come close. Inside the chapel, a thin servant girl in a thin dress and a 900-year-old king sat across from each other on cold stones and traded the secrets that 2 lifetimes had been built around. When the first gray light came through the small window, Vaelric stood up. "They are gone," he said. "The sun is coming." She stood up too. Her legs were stiff. Her hands were warm now. The chapel had taken the cold out of her without her noticing. "Veldenmoor," she said. "Veldenmoor," he said. They walked out into the morning together. The black stallion was waiting in the wet grass by the chapel wall. The 3 remaining assassins had ridden away into the trees. The body of the bowman lay where Vaelric had left him. Vaelric lifted her up onto the horse. He swung up behind her this time. She felt his cold, steady chest at her back. She felt the long, dark blade across his thigh. She felt the heat of the rising sun on her face for the first time in what felt like a very long life. "Lord Vaelric," she said. "Lyra, I have not yet decided whether to keep your name behind my teeth." "I know," he said. "You will earn it, or you will lose it. We will see which." "Yes," he said, very quietly. "We will see which." They rode east into the gray morning. Behind them, the obsidian fortress sat on its black mountain and did not yet know that its king had not come home. The head cook in the cold scullery wiped his hands on his apron and waited for news that would never arrive in the shape he expected. The thin, pale boy who had wanted her to run sat alone in the silver birches and tried to remember what hunger had felt like and could not. And under the mountains, in the deep dark where the chains were made of words, the buried ones turned in their long sleep, felt the old tongue still warm in a living throat, and went back to dreaming. Lyra held the reins of her own life in her 2 small hands now. She did not yet know what she would do with them. She only knew that the king at her back was breathing in time with her, that the sun on her face was a thing she had been given back, and that somewhere far ahead of them was a tower older than the pact where her grandmother's grandmother had once carved wards into stone for a girl who had not yet been born. She rode toward it. She did not lower her eyes again.